Can I just say, I love this budget keyboard that I built. It feels really nice. It has a screen, for God's sake. I filled it with foam. It's made out of aluminum. And wait,
You can get it pre-built?
with really thick keycaps? What? Well, almost, and I think we're gonna need to talk about this one. Howdy hey, I'm Hipyo Tech, and I've built hundreds of keyboards, and my favorite thing about them is that they keep getting cheaper. Now, often with custom keyboards, they're either out of stock, or way too expensive, or maybe not very good. But in this case, I'm gonna be building a budget keyboard, but that's not all, because I'm also going to be building it on a budget using a couple very weird techniques and some cheap keycaps and switches. But there's a catch, because the company that sent me this keyboard also sent me a pre-built version for only $10 more. So my goal is to see if I can build a better keyboard on a budget. All in hopes to see, is it worth building your own keyboard in 2023? Oh, did I mention I'm gonna give you some tips on how to make your keyboard even better? Speaking of better, please make me feel better by hitting the subscribe button. Thanks. Now, later in this video, I am gonna show you the pre-built version of this keyboard that only costs $10 more. But first, let's start the story with the bare bones version. It's worth noting, this video is sponsored by Cidoo, who did send me these keyboards. However, they did not review this video or tell me what to say. There's also a really important distinction between the bare bones version of this keyboard and the built version, which I'll talk about more later. Some keen-eyed viewers might notice I did already get into the unboxing, and you saw a USB-C cable as well as, stabilizers that are pre-included. Now, oftentimes with budget keyboards, stabilizers are gonna suck, so I'll be putting those to the test later. Just like Nola is putting the box to the test right now. Now, let me walk you guys through some of the goals for this video. I want to try and build the best possible keyboard under $200, as I want this to compete with the Zoom 75 like Nola is competing for my attention. Now, I imagine because the Zoom 75 is probably made out of more premium materials, this is going to be a pretty hard challenge, but I'm up for it. And one of the ways I might do that is with this foam that is included with the keyboard. There's also a lot more foam that we'll be looking at soon, but Nola's eating some of it. Now, I know there's gonna be that one guy in the comments that hates fun that's like, stop showing your cat in your videos. This is so annoying. I wanna see you build a keyboard like a real nerd. Well, sometimes I don't get to choose whether or not Nola's in my videos. Just like, look, she's just sitting there. What am I gonna do, tell her no? What am I, some kind of monster that's gonna tell a cat no? Anyways, for $130 US, you can get the bare bones kit here, and on the box, they say, this is exactly what I like, thank you. And I'm gonna need to determine if that actually is true. If you're new to keyboards, a bare bones kit means that you need to add the switches, the stabilizers, and the keycaps yourself, which we'll be doing later in the video. You might be wondering, wow, it's 3.3 pounds for a keyboard. Why is that? Well, this keyboard is made almost entirely out of aluminum. Now, as far as first impressions go, it seems to be a cheaper type of aluminum than something like the Zoom 75 is made out of. Check out my video on that in the top right. But it does have this really nice badge, and oh my God, they were hiding a dongle there the whole time. It's always nice to see 2.4 gigahertz wireless, as I think Bluetooth is just kind of not worth using on keyboards, especially if you play video games. And I think that's a very clever way of hiding it rather than just hiding it in the top of the case. Now, the reason why I say the keyboard feels like it's made out of a cheaper type of aluminum is that the case is relatively pingy. Now, it's to be seen whether or not that's going to show up in the final build, as sometimes keyboard manufacturers do some weird magic to make it not sound pingy. If you're wondering why you can't hear the case pinging, it's because I'm stupid and forgot to plug in my mic. Please go comment, thank you for plugging in your mic, Hipyo, very smart of you. Another feature about this keyboard that is pretty interesting is this screen in the top right. It's a 1.14 inch LED screen, and from what I can tell, it has like a little calendar and time feature. It's supposed to be fully customizable, however, I could not find the software anywhere on Cidoo's website. This actually leads me into my next point, which this board is supposed to be VIA compatible, which is one of the best softwares for customizing your keyboard. However, that was also nowhere to be found on their website. Maybe that'll change by the time this video goes live though. So I actually cannot comment on the software experiences of either of these keyboards at all. What I can comment about is the disassembly, however, because this thing is actually relatively easy to disassemble. It's just 6 screws on the back and a little bit of wow stick magic, and then bada bing, bada boom, you've got the thing open. Which for the bare bones kit actually is necessary in order to build the keyboard. Now, if you're looking at this and you're like, oh my God, Hipyo, building a keyboard, this is really daunting. I just stumbled upon your video because I saw a cool TikTok or something. Well, don't worry, I'll be getting into how easy it is in just a second, but there is also a fully built version later in this video, but it's a bit worse and I'll tell you why. Now, this keyboard comes with a polycarbonate plate with flex cuts, Personally, I don't think the flex cuts are necessary here, but we will see a lot of flex later in this video. After unplugging 3 cables, which are relatively easy to do, this reveals a lot of foam that comes with the board. And remember, foam is preference, so you could choose to admit as much of this as you actually want. However, because this is a budget keyboard, it might not sound as nice if you remove a lot of the foam, because it's cheaper, pingier aluminum. Now, here's one thing I've never seen before. There's almost like a film, like a plastic wrap pre-installed on the PCB. Like, did they follow the Hipyo mod? Now, here's what I'm assuming is all of the foam is going to help reduce the case ping, and this should sound like a relatively good keyboard once we've got it all fully built. However, that is preference. But we can't build it until we have the stabilizers and everything else installed, and the stabilizers that came included were not lubed, they were entirely bone dry. So you will need your own lubricant to lube these stabilizers, which could add an extra $15 or so to this whole entire endeavor. But let me show you a quick tip that I use to lube my stabilizers super fast and super well. And no, it's not NOLA. I get a ton of Krytox 205G0, which is like a thick lube on my brush, and I thoroughly lube the inside housing of each stabilizer. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, what next? Do I lube the stem? No, you just put the stem right in. You actually don't lube the stem because it's redundant. However, what you do lube is the wire. You dip it in just globs of Krytox 205G0, or in this case, Permatex dielectric grease. You want this bad boy coated very thoroughly, but not too thick, kind of like you see here. Now, there's other ways to mod stabilizers, like a Holy mod and a bunch of other stuff, but nowadays with a lot of modern stabilizers, I feel like a lot of that isn't necessary, and literally all I did here was lube the housing and the wire and NOLA. And you'll hear in the final sound test that these sound really good. I did not do any extra tuning other than just this. But make sure you have some paper towels on hand, because dear God, it gets messy. Next, I'm just gonna poke holes in this film that's pre-installed on the PCB. And I'm not fully sure if you're supposed to leave this film on the PCB or not, so I'll pin a comment that says if it's a bad idea or something, so before you build it, make sure you check the pinned comment. But thanks to NOLA's support, we've got the keyboard built, and now I'm gonna have to take like a 15-minute intermission while she licks my beard. This is the life. Please go leave a like and subscribe and a comment for Hipyo loving his cat, because Hipyo's just such a nice little guy. He takes such good care of his cat. He even lets his cat lick his hair. Next, I'm just gonna put the PE foam on, and which I really should have done before I put the stabilizers on, and then the plate foam. Now, remember how I said I was gonna build this thing on a budget? Well, I needed to go to Amazon and find some really cheap switches. But not just any cheap switches, because those might not be factory lubed or very good, and I got some recommendations from you guys to check out the Epomaker Leobog Greywood V3s. That is a mouthful and a half. They're a linear switch that's $25 for a batch of 100, which is a very good value, and they are supposedly factory lubed. This checks a lot of my boxes for a beginner switch, and it's affordable, which is good. However, my batch did have some issues which we need to talk about later, so maybe don't go out and buy them yet. Next, I put all the switches on my keyboard with a little bit of magic. I definitely didn't need the silica gel, and it's time to move on to the next step. Ooh, those already sound and feel very, very nice. Okay. Again, I didn't record the sound because my mic wasn't plugged in. But before I show you the finished build, let me show you its competition. This is the pre-built Cidoo V75. Now, at first glance, the accessories are the same. There's the same cable, the same keycap and switch puller, but under the surface, for $10 more, a couple things are quite different. So the first difference is that this thing is fully built. However, it's using the same exact case. So this is about the most perfect comparison I could possibly make between building your own keyboard and buying a pre-built, ignoring the millions of variables. Now, there are a few differences with the case, which we need to talk about. The first you might notice is the badge is silver, and the second thing you might notice is in the top right of the keyboard, there is a knob. So if you like the idea of having a screen on your keyboard, well, then you need to pay $10 less. But if you like the idea of having a knob, then you need to pay $10 more, which feels backwards, but you have to remember you're also getting switches and keycaps and a sick finger workout. Nice. Don't ask me what I do with those. However, I do have a few gripes with the pre-built version in particular. And my first is that the legends on the keycaps in the bottom left is just a terrible choice. I hate that. But is there anything else I'm gonna hate about the keycaps? Well, actually, no, because these are really thick dye sub PBT keycaps. They're remarkably high quality for a pre-built keyboard, which I honestly can't complain about whatsoever. Now I have some bad news. The pre-built keyboard only comes in one color scheme, so if you don't like the beige retro look, then you're kind of screwed on this one, and you're gonna have to go for some alternatives like the Keychron Q1 or something like that. For the bare bones version, I might have an alternative, which I'll talk about later. And here's the second major difference, and the one that really left me scratching my head. The pre-built version comes with RGB and a nice little RGB strip. Every key has RGB, which is great. I like that. But then for some reason on the bare bones, they just left it out. Why would you leave out my RGB? I like RGB.
Give me my colors, dude. I want my colors.
Anyways, for 140 bucks, I'd say the pre-built is a pretty darn good package. If you're someone that's really lazy, doesn't want to do anything with your keyboard, you like this aesthetic and color scheme, it feels pretty nice to type on for a budget keyboard. The switches feel smooth, the gasket performance is lackluster at best, and provided they actually post the VIA files, then the software support for this thing would be pretty good as well. It's also worth mentioning that a 75% layout is very efficient if you don't need a numpad, but you're probably waiting for the but. Well, you gotta like buy me dinner first or something, come on. I'll go over my final thoughts in a couple minutes after we build the other keyboard, but let's just get back into the budget pre-built build. Now, this part might seem a little bit daunting to you at home if you're building this keyboard yourself, but I assure you it's actually pretty easy. I'm putting the gaskets on one by one on the top and bottom of the plate. I think you could also put them on the case, but I personally prefer to put them on the plate. The sides are entirely optional, and I am not going to put any on the left and right side of the plate. However, important, if you're building this at home, make sure you use the thicker gasket for the bottom and the thinner gasket for the top. If you're wondering what the point of gaskets is at all and you're new to keyboards, it basically makes the board a little bit softer to type on, it absorbs some of the vibrations, and when you're working with cheaper aluminum like this, it makes it so it's way less pingy, kind of like this foam that I'm putting at the bottom of the case. Now, I know a lot of you that think you're really special are gonna be like, wow, this keyboard's gonna entirely sound like foam now, you've made a foam keyboard. But honestly, I was really shocked at how full this keyboard still ended up sounding, and how significant the gasket performance was. Like, the flex on this thing is kind of unreal. Now, the pre-built version had a lot less flex, and that's mostly because I left the side gaskets off. But remember how I said building a keyboard is easy? Like, that's 90% of the keyboard build, you guys. Was any of that hard? Did any of that look hard? If it did, maybe don't build a keyboard because you're probably not cut out for it. But now it's time for the best part, choosing the keycaps, which is a little bit dicey and very preference based as it mostly just involves color schemes. Now, I picked up this keycap set for $25 on an Amazon Prime sale, so I think this is a very good cheap keycap set. It's the Sumgzin fishing keycaps. Some of you might remember this color scheme from my Zoom 75 video and my Razer keyboard video and my drop keyboard video. I've used this color scheme quite a lot. It does really well in thumbnails. Don't get mad at me, all right? It's you guys that click on them. However, this one's a little bit different because these keycaps come in cherry profile instead of the weird other profile. So they're gonna feel a lot more familiar and a lot nicer to type on, but maybe less thocky and poppy. Now these are also double shot PBT keycaps, so they're gonna sound a little bit clackier than the die sub that come on the pre-built version, but I don't think there's gonna be that much of a difference here. And you're probably wondering, well, if there's not that much of a difference, then why are you building it yourself? And the main point here is that I can customize the aesthetic of my build and the feel of my switches, and it's not that much harder than just buying the pre-built version. Now, sure, it's gonna cost an extra 30 bucks or so, maybe, I'm not good at counting. But if most of keyboards is preference, then my preference is that this looks a lot better than the pre-built version. Granted, you could buy the pre-built version and just swap the keycaps out, and is that cheaper? I'll do the math and I'll put it up on screen. It could be cheaper. Or if you want to save even more money, there are a lot of alternatives to this keyboard that are out there. Check out my video on the Monsgeek M1 or my keyboard buying guide video in general. Now, you're probably wondering, did this thing end up any better than the pre-built version? And to that I say, it ended up basically the same. The sound is pretty similar, the feel is pretty similar, but the look, you know, obviously I like this better. However, as I mentioned before, I did run into a problem with these switches. Why? For some ungodly reason, I got a completely bum batch of the Leobog switches. Like, literally half of the switches just didn't work. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, maybe it's a bent pin, Hipyo. Maybe you're being dumb. None of the pins were bent. Well, then maybe it's the keyboard's fault. And no, because I tried these Unzi switches in the keyboard, and those worked perfectly fine in every spot that didn't work. So then I tried the Leobog switches in another keyboard, and they didn't work in that either. So I don't know what's up with that. Don't buy the Leobog switches. I don't really know why they don't work, but they don't work. Anyways, I'll be leaving you with the sound test of both of these keyboards, and I would love to know what you think. Do you hear a difference? Do you see a difference? Well, obviously you see a difference. I mean, you have eyes. Which of these do you think has more value to you? Or is there some flaw that I completely missed that you need to comment down below?